Good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar around the state of regional goods movement. I'm Stephen Bader, Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, or East Bay EDA. From groceries on our shelves to materials that build our homes, from the exports that fuel our global competitiveness to the packages arriving at our doorsteps, goods movement is the quiet backbone of our economy. And right now, it's undergoing rapid transformation. Today, we're very fortunate to have a few subject matter experts join us as we dig deeper into this timely topic. So to get things started, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Jacob, Executive Director of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, or PMSA, who's our partner on today's webinar. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and really appreciate the partnership with East Bay EDA and all the work that you guys are doing. And I'd like to just highlight the efforts underway at East Bay EDA to do cataloging and preservation of our industrial properties around the East Bay. Really important and a really good complement to the topics that we're going to be discussing today with the panel we have on. As folks that signed up might have seen, we have a really good array of experts that represent various different parts of our supply chain. On with us today are Matt Davis, the Chief Public Engagement Officer from the Port of Oakland. And he's going to be talking a little bit about global trade trends, some of the investments that the port's making in its infrastructure and its environmental programs, and some of the infrastructure challenges that we're all facing in our sector right now. Peggy Ygbuhay is from Union Pacific Railroad, and she is in charge of Northern California and Nevada public affairs for UP, and is in the unenviable position of getting to deal with thousands of local governments across several states. But obviously there's a lot of exciting things happening at UP right now to talk about as well. And then we'll hopefully be joined in the bottom half of the hour by Nick Chiappe from California Trucking Association. Nick is their vice president, works very closely with us on issues in the state capitol affecting the supply chain, and in particular, the comings and goings of the drayage fleets from ports across the state, and facilitating intermodal transfers between truck and rail, ship and rail, and then delivering things obviously to the distribution centers and warehouses that help our entire system run. As Stephen mentioned, I'm Mike Jacob with PMSA. We represent ocean carriers, marine terminal operators, other maritime interests on the U.S. West Coast. And one of the things that we're really happy to talk to people about right now are all of the different impacts that global and geopolitical events are having on our economy, on the way that we view trade and goods movement, and highlighting the fact that this is a sector that is often overlooked for good reason, right? So the business that we're all in, whether it's ocean carriers, rail carriers, motor carriers, we are all in the business of moving goods as fast, as quickly, and economically and efficiently as possible, which means we want to be everywhere. We want to be ubiquitous, but we want the cost of what we do to be very, very small per unit. And we don't want to have any hiccups that would actually bring anything we do to your attention. So when the system works well, we are in the background. And what's happened from the pandemic and bring forward to now is we've had a whole lot of series of events where people are realizing that we're out there, we have some vulnerabilities, and there are some impacts of our system that are relatively outsized because we've served such a critical and ongoing role in the business of making sure that your day-to-day life is what you want it to be. You can actually get the products you order online, but even also if you're a manufacturer, you're getting the components you need. If you're a farmer in the Central Valley, that you can export the products you need to get overseas to the markets you have. So one of the things that maybe I'll start the dialogue off with turning it over to Matt. Um, the port's seen a lot of what's I think been captured in the global trade press as a roller coaster over the last year. We kind of don't know what to expect with all the tariff changes that have gone into effect. But you guys have come out looking actually pretty okay over the last year. For all of the predictions of things falling off a cliff, you've had pretty steady volumes over the last year. How do you guys plug into the global trade trends? What's happening with your volumes right now in terms of making sure you're dealing with all the uncertainty?
Thanks, Mike. I have our railroad partners behind me, so I don't know if that comes through on the audio. But I appreciate East Bay EDA hosting this. I also appreciate those attendees today. Yeah, I mean, I think the focus on the supply chain and on the port's role in the international global supply chain has really kind of been accentuated over the past 6 years. Obviously, the pandemic put a huge amount of focus on, where are my things? Why aren't they getting to my stores in time? We had I think a brief lull in sort of a lot of the actors within the supply chain sort of recalibrating and sort of restoring a lot of their normal operations. 2025 and obviously the election of 2024, certainly introduced a new level of dynamic intervention that we don't really have a lot of insider control over about what will be the next um, regulatory or policy intention. From the Port of Oakland's perspective, where we sit in the Trans-Pacific shipping, line, we're generally the second port of call for a lot of carriers that will discharge the majority of their American imported goods in either LA Long Beach or in the Pacific Northwest. And then because of our geographic advantage to the Central Valley and a lot of shippers connected by rail throughout the entire Midwest, we are the sort of quickest point of connection and transit between the U.S. West Coast and a lot of consumers and markets along the Pacific Rim. So we do have that 50-50 import export capacity, which I think has sustained us really well because we're not quite as exposed to a lot of the steep drop offs in imports due to tariffs. What is of great concern is that, our export advantage, which is geographic in nature, but we've also tried to capitalize on it by really expanding our infrastructure and capacity here. The Port of Oakland is the largest exporter of refrigerated containers in the U.S. Again, because we are that last U.S. Point of distribution and loading before they get on the ship and go back to Asia. So we can't take that market for granted, and that's what we're really trying to sort of make sure is that we can sustain that market advantage. And then during the pandemic as well, we did see that we did experience what's called a leakage of certain sort of container imports that would normally come to Oakland, but because of the need to increase the efficiencies and because of some of the delays, um, some of those containers were actually being dropped off in LA and then driven up to the Bay Area. So we're really trying to kind of recapture that, bring them back to their natural, most logical point of import if they're going to be going to Manteca or Tracy or in the northern part of the valley. Um, Higher fuel prices, if there's any upside to higher fuel prices, is that that could sort of lead to shippers wanting to avoid that cost. I don't really think there's a whole lot of other upsides to the current conflicts that we're seeing. Um, but it's obviously been a challenging time for anybody involved in international trade. And so we're going to continue to just kind of weather the storm and focus on the investments that we have here. We have great enthusiasm from a lot of our terminal operating partners to expand their operations. We're bringing in a new generation of container ship-to-shore cranes, which are being assembled currently on site. So, and then we'll talk a little bit later about a lot of our environmental and decarbonization efforts, which are proceeding full steam ahead, even with support of the federal government, which has been a great relief. And we have a nearly $500 million effort to reduce diesel operated equipment, excuse me, here in Oakland, and we're proceeding on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that might be worth chatting about a little bit more on those same lines is one of the takeaways from the pandemic has been the need for resiliency in our system. Um, typically run a just-in-time environment for customers. We are making sure that what we're doing is we're doing the least amount of overhead per unit possible throughout our entire system to scale efficiently, but also to reduce costs for customers. And I think what we found in the pandemic was that when we have real surges and changes in what's predictable with respect to those volumes, it exposes a lack of system resiliency. And so, Matt, what I think I heard from you is that part of the goal of what you're investing in is to build some additional resiliency into the system, create some buffers. Could you talk a little bit about some of the projects that you have underway that are both, capacity enhancing, but also efficiency improving? Maybe the turning basin project and some other things that are ways that we stay in those strings and we stay competitive with LA and Long Beach for that cargo in Northern California.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Certainly, we're trying to, again, make sure that of all the moving pieces and of all the sort of instability that's been injected into the system, that we can create some certainty of operations here in Oakland. So whether that's increased use of technology, improving the appointment system so that truckers will have the, certainty and ability to ensure that they're not going to be waiting in large queues, working on our roadway capacity just for the ingress and egress of traffic, of which we are very truck dominant. We're grateful and appreciative of the work that the railroads are doing to support our customers, but we're not as rail dependent or utilized in that same manner as you would have at Seattle Tacoma or LA Long Beach. But it is an important part of our multimodal network. The Turning Basins project is one that kind of is operating in a little bit out of the public sphere just because we have an existing turning basin, but we do need to enlarge it because ships have become so much larger in size and length, well beyond what we had originally envisioned back in 1999 when we authorized our original deepening efforts. And so that's proceeding both in the inner and the outer harbor for design and engineering, and then ultimately construction within the next few years. On the terminals themselves, we are a landlord port, so we're working closely with our major three terminal operators, to solidify and extend their leases. They need the certainty to be able to make the long-term investments, both on their equipment and then just over their overall operations to really be successful and to continue to serve all of the customers here. Working closely, have some major roadway projects that are sort of legacy but are still underway with 7th Street, so a major reconfiguration and redoing of the underpass that leads as one of the major arterial gateways into the port. And so yeah, again, really just trying to ensure that amid the dynamic nature of the global environment that we're operating in, that we can at least ensure that locally, we are able to guarantee a level of service and a level of efficiency that reduces some of that uncertainty for a lot of shippers. Because again, uncertainty at the ultimate end is the major pain point. Whether it's a tariff, I think we've heard from a lot of shippers that they don't necessarily need to argue about the amount of the tariff. Obviously, higher is not going to be conducive to increased imports, but they need to know if it's certain and what they can build around and how their supply chain can withstand and absorb that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that just really want to touch on for people is how much the role of the port really does depend on this partnership between the port as the public landlord and the developer and private parties, including the terminals that are the tenants and the customers. It really is a public-private partnership. It's very unique in the way that we do a lot of the work that we do in the transportation world with respect to financing and underwriting. But it's really served us well at the Port of Oakland, which is going to be celebrating its 100th birthday next year, on this model of public-private partnerships, really building into the fabric of the port, I don't want to say symbiosis necessarily, but a close working relationship that's built on success on both sides of the ledger when you're becoming more efficient you're facilitating more investment, both into the public property that's being managed and developed, but also on the private side, utilizing that property to its greatest extent. So really driving the idea home that you need to invest funds in the infrastructure itself in order to get something out of it on the back end, and really appreciate the partnership of the port on that. I think we'll probably come back after I turn over to Peggy to talk about some of the environmental work that we're all working on at the port. Peggy, you guys obviously have a separate approach to some of this because you guys are all privately financed and underwritten with respect to your own property. But you guys have a lot of efficiency work that you're doing. And I apologize, I've got a little echo there. If you want to talk a little bit about what's on that?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, thank you, East Bay, for hosting this webinar. Thank you, PMSA, for being the moderator. We are excited to talk about rail. We have seen, Matt talked about leakage, right? We've been seeing a leakage in the nation of a conversion from rail to truck for decades at this point. Union Pacific has been around for 160 plus years, and we ship what people want. And what we're seeing is an uptick in intermodal, the imports, exports. California's economy is very diverse. And, what I was surprised to learn, and we're in the agricultural, epicenter of the nation, but 80% of almonds are exported out of California. And, one of the things that we were able to be agile on is the almonds couldn't be exported the way they historically were with trucks to the port of LA, and that transition to Oakland, really working with the rail and the business. So, when we see a challenge, when we have a crisis, it really challenges us to think outside the box, so to speak, and look at the ways that we are, operating as a company and operating in partnership with the ports and our customers. So, it's an exciting time for Union Pacific. As Mike said earlier, we're always looking at ways to become more operationally efficient. Really, it's for the bottom line. We're all seeing every price go up, for whatever reason. There's going to be a new reason tomorrow, but Union Pacific is excited to announce a merger with another Class 1 railroad on the East Coast. We are really excited about basically removing touches to the commodities that you guys use every day. When you woke up this morning, it's the furniture you use, all the technology. I mean, that's all imported, exported out of California. A lot of that is on rail. We deal in the bulk commodity business, but we're very diversified. Again, we've seen an uptick in intermodal. We've seen we have a great agricultural import export. There's also a large domestic, need for this transportation, but we have to get more competitive with trucks. And that's going to be good for the environment. It's going to be good for anybody who drives on the road that has to deal with these long haul truckers. We are looking to convert 2 million trucks from road to rail. And that's a big deal to every person in this webinar, but really every individual, because not only are we removing that congestion, rail is more efficient. We are 75% lower emissions than truck, and we can actually take 1 ton of goods with 1 gallon of gas, almost 500 miles. You don't get more efficient than that. We're also making strides in technology. We're always looking at ways to reduce our fuel consumption, because that's a cost. That's a cost to the business. It's a cost to the bottom line. And all those costs do get passed on to all of us individually. So we are really excited about the merger. We know that this is going to be a game changer and have so many benefits for the nation But really, what we see here in California, we lead the nation on transportation and movement of goods. And this is going to be definitely a game changer, opening up markets that were limited, frankly, to truck, to rail.
Yeah. And obviously we'll have Nick from trucking on in a little bit as well. And so obviously there's a lot of network impacts for all these things that we're all very interested in talking about. But for the folks who are on that are familiar with rail in general, but maybe not with some of your local assets, and how you serve not just the intermodal market, but the East Bay in general. Peggy, what kind of projects do you guys have on the horizon that are local?
Well, what I would say to that is, the projects we're working in partnership with the port, as Matt alluded to earlier, 7th Street. That bridge actually hosts our rail lines in the yard. So that is a major undertaking by really Alameda County Transportation Commission in partnership with the port and Union Pacific and the city to renew and strengthen that piece of network. That's a big deal. When you talk about supply chain resilience, it's investing in the future and making sure that you have these elements in place so that you can continue to grow and prosper. The other bridge project that we're excited about is Adeline. We're excited to have a seat at the table when we talk about a brand new bridge providing access into the port, facilitating goods movement more operationally efficiently. That's what we all want to see. Trucks idling outside the port to access is never a winner. It's always a loser. So those are some of the big projects that are being managed publicly. We're also looking at, how can we go directly from a ship to rail? So we are continuing to, ask those challenging questions so that we can get a more direct, again, less touches. That's what we're looking at. Less touches mean, a cheaper price on transportation.
So, and then Peggy, maybe one other thing to transition into some other questions. We'll come back to Matt on. You have some safety concerns, obviously, always at the forefront of what you do at the railroad. And part of the evaluation of safety and risk has really come up recently about making sure that we are very clear about making sure that we're not planning for industrial uses that aren't compatible with other uses in the rail context specifically, not just with respect to your customers. And we'll talk about that a little bit too, about land use patterns more generally. But for you guys, what is it that you guys need to see to be able to ensure that your rail projects are safely interacting with the community moving forward in terms of just design elements, but also what do you expect from the public when they're looking at your network becoming much, much busier over the next coming years?
Yeah, and this is going to fall into the efficiency equation, right? We are building longer trains so that we have less trains and less impact on the network. But separating industrial zones from residential use, that's key to keeping these different uses separate. Every situation is unique. California has around 8,000 at-grade crossings in this. I mean, that's number 2 to Texas in the nation. And Texas is a interesting and very different place than California. But California has more grade separations than Texas. So I think it's important to look at how the land is being used, what are the future developments, what makes the most sense, and really understand all the modes that are in that space. Again, every area is very unique and has to be treated very specifically to address any of the safety concerns. That, like you said, Mike, safety of our customers, our communities, our employees is at the forefront. We're winning in safety. We've had the safest year on record last year. We've never been as safe as we are. And we're proud of that. We continue to drive that number down, but the vulnerability that the state has, and a lot of people don't actually realize these crossings, our public crossings, are really under the jurisdictions of the road authorities. So in your community, you have an agreement with the railroad to occupy the space with a crossing, but these are crossings that are managed, and the safety is managed holistically with the railroad, with the city, as well as the regulatory agency, the California Public Utility Commission, who has the regulatory arm over these crossings. So it makes those safety improvements a little bit more complex, I would say. But that's why I'm excited to have these conversations, to get my name out there, to talk to folks. Please ask questions relative to your particular area, different things that you have seen. There is a lot of misunderstandings about how we manage our work. I would also say that, the trucks use it, and we love trucks, don't get us wrong. The supply chain is trucks, warehouses, rail, ship. I mean, we all work together. Where we're after is the long haul trucks. Those trucks use public infrastructure that everybody pays for. Trains use private infrastructure. It's privately funded, it's privately maintained. We spend here at Union Pacific alone, and we're one of two Class 1 railroads out here in the state. We spend $9 million every day. And you guys may have seen on the side of the rail some ties recently, because we're in the middle of a tie project. We're replacing over 50,000 ties in the Bay Area on that line alone. And that job is going to wrap up in April, but we spend a lot of our own money to invest in the capital, because that's what makes us resilient. We're ready for more work. We're ready for more commodities. It doesn't necessarily mean more trains, which is good news for our passenger partners, because we host about 75 to 80% of passenger on our lines, and the same with BNSF.
Thanks, Peggy. Maybe we can change direction a little bit too, and go back to Matt. You mentioned all the decarbonization investments that you guys are focusing on, and I don't think people have an appreciation for how much work we've all done as a supply chain, but also at nodes. And the port is obviously a node. Most of what we do in transportation is a network, and we're distributive, but ports and terminals are nodes of activity. So traditionally, they've been places where we have the most potential impact to the communities that are nearby. We have the highest amount of externalities, and that can be air emissions or light and noise or traffic or lots of things. And the port's been at the forefront of a conversation about really reducing those mitigations, reducing those impacts through mitigations. And Matt, you guys just have a tremendous success story in terms of reducing diesel emissions and other things over the last couple of years. You're transforming that vision from local community impacts to global decarb. Can you talk a little bit about how far you've come, and then what's next on your agenda for turning that page?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. No, I think as a public agency, obviously we have a responsibility, entrusted to us both by the state and by our local agency, of which we're a department of the city of Oakland, with an independent board of port commissioners. But we have a responsibility to provide a whole range of public benefits. We have to obviously operate the seaport, operate the airport in a way that's conducive to the needs of our customers and tenants, that deliver benefits and deliver tax benefits and proceeds, and really support the regional economy, and through our operations, support nearly 100,000 jobs throughout the entire region. So, and in some cases, our market extends, directly into Utah and the near West states. So That being said, we don't look at a lot of what we're doing right now as sort of a traditional mitigation effort. You have a project that you propose, you try to find ways to mitigate it down to the least possible impact or certainly the most feasibly reduced impact, but it's really sort of ingrained in how we're going to be operating and preparing for the future. So the mainstay of our efforts, began, I would say, well over 15 years ago to reduce the impact of diesel emissions, both from ships, trucks, in partnership with rail, obviously, under a different regulatory standard, and then cargo handling equipment, which is equipment that you don't see on the roads, but is domiciled here in Oakland and has a great impact on our neighbors, both in West Oakland and beyond. Um, Now that we've sort of gotten through, an 85% reduction in diesel particulate matter emissions, which is, the diesel soot, the next stage really became how we could really tackle a decarbonization strategy. And so one of the constant, efforts that we have from a planning and community participatory sort of process is, we meet regularly with nonprofits and our community stakeholders to really hear from them what is their major prioritization of how we can, both reduce the impact and create additional public benefits, by including them in some of the opportunities for workforce development and, being part of the next generation of folks that are going to maintain or repair or be involved in that green sort of industrial ecosystem. We were amazingly gratified in 2024 when we received a $322 million EPA Clean Ports Grant. That was in September of 2024. In November of 2024, obviously, there was an election, and we were concerned, to say the least, at what the new posture would be. We worked closely with the EPA administration to solidify our grant and get that recorded. And then in January of 2025, I think we even submitted a reimbursement for like $700 out of a $322 million grant just to make sure that, the phone line was working. And so since then, we've been able to really expand that portfolio with a number of community partnerships and our terminal operators. So industry is really leading the way and really telling us how they want to see their operations transformed and how they want to see their posture, both here in Oakland and through the rest of their portfolio. And so we're, going forward with a number of durable equipment purchases. We have plans for hundreds of EV trucks to come into the system, including a truck loaner program, so that those independent truck owners or those that have small capacity to maybe make the big leap into an EV truck purchase could maybe kind of use what we call like a loaner library model. So they could kind of check one out from us that we would own and sort of use it for a week or a month to see if it works for their system. These are much more expensive pieces of equipment, and that's just the frank reality of it. So ensuring that there's a confidence in the durability, the reliability, and the range of these electric trucks or hydrogen trucks, if they really come into more commercialization, are going to be key. And again, we have a system here where we can provide charging infrastructure, where we can, ensure that they're going to be able to leave the port fully charged. But as they enter into the rest of the regional network, that's really going to be incumbent upon, a lot of local governments, the state. I wouldn't say the feds right now, since they're not really interested in participating in that deployment of charging infrastructure. But it's really going to be incumbent upon the entire region to embrace that capacity, because your truck's only as good as far as it can travel and then get back to its original dispatch location. Inclusive of that is obviously workforce. So it's a little bit sort of on the new path right now. We're not quite sure exactly what the entire standard is going to be for those who repair these pieces of equipment. A lot of them are going to be under warranty for a while, so there may not be all of the immediate availability of hundreds or thousands of new job openings, and some of the existing personnel are going to be upskilled and uptrained. And so we're working closely with your I would say sister organization, the Pacific Maritime Association, which employs the longshore men and women, to really ensure that they can be ready for that tipping point when we do see a large cluster of EV equipment on dock. And again, really just continuing to ensure that the public benefits of the whole goods movement system are reflective of the work that we're doing.
Yeah. And Good timing. We had Nick from CTA just join, but before I ask Nick a couple questions, just a couple of follow-ups on everything Matt just said. I don't think we can understate how transformative the changes have already been with respect to reductions in diesel particulate matter from port operations in general, but especially from trucks. And so the idea that somehow when you're going out and you're doing industrial work right now, that the trucks themselves are going to be resulting in huge new impacts on your local community from an air quality or air toxics perspective is a totally different conversation than it was 15 years ago. So if you look at diesel trucks that are calling at the Port of Oakland, the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, any rail intermodal yard in the state, those diesel particulate matter emissions are down about 98% from where they were 15 years ago. And that's across the board. That's probably the cleanest trucking fleet in North America right now, even before you start this pivot that Matt was talking about to new zero emissions models and really focusing on decarb. We've done an amazing job at reducing public health risks. So Nick, maybe it's a good transition to you. And Nick, thank you for joining us. Nick's actually joining us from the state capitol where he had to do some last minute lobbying work today. Really appreciate you joining us. Is there some basic kind of high level education awareness on your end that you might be able to pass along about where you guys are as an industry? And it doesn't have to just be port focused, just industrially on creating new efficiencies, making sure that people can do business here. We know that there's been a couple of high profile trucking bankruptcies lately that have been really kind of problematic. What are you guys doing for your basic business environment to make sure you're competitive here?
Hey, Mike, thank you for allowing me to participate. Just want to check you can hear me okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you for the question, and you are correct. There's been struggles within the trucking community the last few years, especially in a freight downturn. For those who are not aware of the trucking freight market, it is volatile at times, and we're currently in the fourth year of a trucking recession, which has made the industry very receptible to hard policy changes, especially some of the changes that have occurred at the federal level in regard to our trade policy with tariffs. Those kind of quick shifts in policy do impact trucking because wherever the cargo is going, you're going to find trucking. And so CTA has been instrumental in kind of tracking some of these issues that are going on and making sure to really vocalize the concerns about our trucking community. Here in California, it can be a little difficult, the push and pull between the federal government and our state government. But CTA is out there, engaging with our representatives and making sure that the trucking voice is heard, either through meeting with the administration to talk about the impact of tariffs and what that has done to the industry. And most recently, the most current event going on right now is this global conflict in Iran, which has led to a temporary or at least a spike right now in fuel prices. So there is concern there about where does that cost go and how is that cost consumed and passed on to the consumer itself. And a lot of times in trucking, those costs are passed on to the consumer, which a lot of people may not be aware about. Um, these costs in being able to transport goods is not always totally absorbed by trucking communities. This goes on to the consumer through the cost of goods, the cost of the services that are done. So it's a pretty profound effect once you kind of make that ripple effect trucking kind of spreads that ripple throughout the industry and onto consumers.
Yeah, certainly it does. And before you got on, one of the things we highlighted really briefly was some of the work East Bay EDA is doing with respect to their industrial lands inventory, and that's part of industrial lands preservation. Um, and you guys are at CTA kind of right in the middle of it with our partners in the warehousing industry right now with the implementation of AB 98, which really impacts warehouse site and design, but also trucking. Would you mind just describing for folks who might not know what the new context is with respect to the state's rules on warehousing, and then what you guys are working on right now to try to smooth some of the rough edges around AB 98?
Yeah, so kind of just in respect to AB 98 and give some background here, that bill was to address a lot of the community concerns related to warehousing and the expansion of it, especially in the San Bernardino Riverside area. You know, wherever there's going to be warehousing built, trucks are going to come to follow. And I think in regard to some of the design elements, I can't speak too much to them since we weren't really involved in the warehousing design portion of it. But there's a truck circulation element to AB 98, which I think will ultimately benefit the industry and communities and just the general supply chain as well, because when trucks are trying to get to their facilities, a lot of times within these cities and counties, truck routes may not be very apparent or publicized. And so, one of the requirements of AB 98 is for cities and counties to publish essentially GPS data on where truck routes are located. And this is an important tool because this kind of brings together both trucking, the community and warehousing and industrial land to align all of those pieces so it's better for communities in the supply chain. Planning should be at the table very early, and AB 98 kind of implements that through the required approvals of truck routes even before construction starts. So that way, when cities and counties are taking a look at where these trucks are going through their community, there's going to be an open public process where the trucking industry can be involved to share the concerns about, what these, if it's coming to restrictions related to weight, to size of these vehicles, but also address the community's concerns about where these trucks should be operating. And I think that's an important tool, is that one, you can bring together the industry and the community together to find a way on how you could implement, new warehousing construction and be able to have the voices of your community heard and those concerns heard, so that once warehousing goes in, we're not raising these concerns after the fact, which is something that we've come to found is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think that is really well said. Just want to note for folks that before we wrap up, we have the Q&A open. So if you have some specific questions, please go ahead and put those in there. We've already got a couple. We'll address them in a sec. But just to reinforce what Nick said, it is really important, I think, for everyone in the supply chain to appreciate the magnitude and the importance of preservation of industrial lands, and then the ability to actually access those properties in ways where it's all eyes wide open, it's all very well planned. Part of the challenge, obviously, is when sensitive receptors, which is, how a lot of people in the air quality world and environmental justice world are quantifying the interaction between people and industrial facilities, the exposure of sensitive receptors to things like emissions and other types of negative externalities. It's really important that we delineate where these places are supposed to be, preserve them, and create boundaries, buffers, what have you, that really create livable communities We're doing a lot of that in Oakland right now. We know other communities are doing it too. Trying to concentrate investments in freight in a way which is really efficient, and making sure that we're concentrating activity away from where people are and really concentrating density for new housing in places where we have TODs and other types of good long-term planning focuses. So really appreciate that, Nick. We've got a couple of questions already um, from some folks about hurdles for the Port of Oakland versus other ports on the West Coast, and what are some reasons for not having a first port of call. Maybe Matt, I'll take a first stab at that, and I'll hand it over to you. Um, we're competing for cargo. And in that competition, first calls are going primarily to Southern California just because there's so much gravity there. Just the market is incredible for imports in Southern California. But it's not to say there isn't a role for the Port of Oakland to play on the import side, even though we really focus on a balanced agenda. So Matt, what are some of the most competitive spots for you guys for imports?
Yeah, no, I think I mean one of the areas and Peggy may be in a good position to talk about this too, but obviously, this is a economy of scale and you do need a consistent volume and a predictive, level to ensure that if you're a shipper and you're owning the goods that you need to get to market, you're not going to want to necessarily incur some additional days of delay for that ship to travel up the coast and come to Oakland. Um, and so, obviously rail and the partnership with rail and between the terminal operator, the shipper is really important. One of the questions I think that was also addressed is, are there some, limitations based on just physical limitations or height along the Donner Pass? I mean, I know the UP did a great job to invest in raising those snow sheds. And so that's not really the impediment that it was, maybe 18 or 19 years ago. Um, I mean, it's also another reiteration that when you do have the Donner Pass and I-80 that's closed for several days at a time due to some, significant snow conditions, the railroad stays open 24 hours. And so that's a huge advantage. We've seen a lot of growth in, the Sparks and, Western Nevada, Northwestern Nevada industrial sector. And so that is a great opportunity for both a balanced import-export, movement of commerce. Again, Peggy can speak to, what the new version of the economy of scale for you for short haul rail would be, whether that's 400 miles or 180 miles, depending on, geography and conditions. So, I don't see that we're going to necessarily be like surpassing or supplanting traditional import gateways, but certainly, as congestion does rise, as diesel fuel prices rise, I mean, we're going to see some shifts in that. But we are operating in a national and international competitive supply chain here. So a lot of shippers have figured out how to exploit the Panama Canal, how to exploit Canadian port gateways, and so that is where local decisions or the lack of or leaning into what industrial lands and industrial activity and utilization of port resources and proximity to a port can really play a role. You mentioned earlier, I mean, obviously diesel emissions has been the dominant part of what has been an aggravating force for a lot of those that might see trucks coming to their community. We can say that an EV truck is not necessarily going to be less obnoxious, due to the operations of that industrial site. So siting and placement and preservation of those corridors are equally important, even if you're not necessarily right next to a port.
Absolutely. Yeah, Peggy, do you want to piggyback on that?
Let me unmute myself first. Yeah, I mean, Matt, definitely. We spent a lot of money notching the tunnels and making sure that we can bring the double stack containers over the Donner Pass. He's exactly right. We don't shut that down. We actually have a gigantic snow blower that we operate when we have the very, very heavy snows in Donner. I mean, there's nothing like it anywhere else on the Union Pacific territory where we get the snow levels the way we do. We last brought that out in the 23 timeframe, but it's usually like about every 7 to 10 years we have to go out there with our big machines to blow it. We have a lot of different pieces of equipment that we use to actually make it passable. It is definitely, we call ourselves snow fighters, and we're very proud of the work that our men and women do on the snow side, to actually make it passable. We don't shut down. We don't jackknife, Caltrans, we work with them. They're great partners, because we do also have to get our men and equipment up the Donner Pass, and from time to time they close it down. And we use the roads too. So I know that we are always looking to get more commodities through the gateway of Oakland. It's a great location. Just like Union Pacific and all the rail companies lost a lot of the market share to trucks, we're always looking at ways to get that back. And we're you heard it earlier from Matt and Mike, the turning basin is one of those. Hardening the infrastructure around the port is another. And what we're looking at is on dock loading, again, removing those touches, creating a transcontinental railroad. All of these things that we are working on in real time is going to make that possible in the future.
Thanks, Peggy. Maybe we have another question here, which I believe was in response to some of Nick's comments on AB 98 that asked, has anyone estimated how much this process will cost? And Nick, I'll turn it back to you, but wanted to just point out there's a lot of different components to this bill, and the ones that Nick's talking about are direct costs to local governments, right? So someone has to actually sit down and actually do the planning for where those truck routes are, identify the truck routes, put them into the circulation element. Nick, if you had anything else, just in terms of updating where that is, I know League of Cities and CSAC were talking about trying to get some additional time to do some of that, to actually get the funding to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where exactly funding is at, but in your point, Mike, you are correct. There is a cost related to staff time for holding these sorts of public meetings. But my understanding is that there has been some time that is being allowed for some of these cities. So specifically for the East Bay, these requirements aren't going to come into effect until I believe about the year 2030. Whereas the warehouse concentration region in Southern California had requirements by the end of this previous year. So I don't have a quantifiable number at hand at what the total cost is to the local jurisdictions.
Yeah. I think what we were hearing from folks was that the cost might not be as much of a factor as actually finding the consulting manpower possible to do it, because every single local jurisdiction in the state would have to go out and try to do it at the same time. And there's only so many transportation consulting firms and engineers out there to do the work at the same time. So definitely something to watch and see, and another wrinkle in some of the industrial preservation work we're doing. Got another question about the capacity of our grid and energy infrastructure to do everything that we're asking of it. That is a big concern of ours in the long term. There's certainly a lot of additional investment that needs to happen in that area. In the last couple of years, we've been doing better than we were several years ago when we had wildfires during the summer and things like that. We'd actually have the state come in, and when they asked you guys to turn off power to your homes and businesses and avoid brownouts, they also asked us to not plug in our ships at berth and things like that to avoid power disruptions. And that hasn't happened for several years. So we're thankful about that, but there are hundreds of megawatts of additional power that need to be added upstream to what we do in order to facilitate the zero emissions transition we've been talking about. And we have one more question, then I'll turn it back
And then
over
Mike,
to Steve.
actually, if I
Yeah,
could
go
just
ahead.
add to that
Yeah,
point,
please do.
something that we're finding too is when we, experience the same disruptions in 2020, 2021, 2022, we've had a shore power regime and a process in place for ships to plug in since 2014. And so it was disheartening at least to hear that, they were needing an additional couple megawatts of potential power usage from us in order to back up 50,000 megawatts statewide. We have, embarked in, as a utility, we are in charge of our own distribution network. All of our transmission of electricity comes in through Pacific Gas and Electric, as does for most throughout the region. I will say that the increase in demand for data storage centers, which have a huge draw on switchgear and other electrical components, we believe has in part, and then tariffs as well, has driven the cost of our electrical upgrade for our distribution network from, about 60 million to about 140 million. And so that's a tremendous cost increase. The state has been a partner. The region has been a partner. There are some existing and legacy systems that are in place, but a lot more is going to need to get done. But at least we're not on the precipice or threat of having to mitigate or throttle our electricity usage right now. But as we see the demand increase, that's going to be a major concern for us in general.
Right. Just across the board, Matt mentioned it earlier. We really need to make sure that we have these distributed networks everywhere if we're going to have electric, vehicles and trucks. You can have all the electrical infrastructure at the port you want, but if there isn't a charger on the other end for it to actually charge up, it might not make it back. So these things have to be network focused. They have to be resilient. And then we're seeing the same thing on the vessel side. We are moving into a decarbonization globally where we need alternative fuels, and those alternative fuels like LNG and ammonia and methanol aren't really available on the US West Coast for fueling ships. So a place we need to go. Stephen, I want to turn it back to you so we can wrap up by 1 o'clock. But as we do that, I wanted to thank Matt, Nick, Peggy, for your time today, and really again thank Stephen, Carlene, the crew at East Bay EDA for working with us and putting this together.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, and thanks again to you, Matt, Peggy, and Nick for your participation. And I noticed right on cue, Peggy, that you managed to have one of your trains right outside Matt's window. So we saw that during the webinar. So goods movement in action here in Northern California. Thanks to all of you for joining. Please follow us on our websites and social media. As a lot of you know, we have two different websites. Our main website at eastbayda.org, as well as our site focused on the region's manufacturing, industrial lands sector, and lots of other things at resilienteastbay.org. We have different newsletters that go out from each of those sites. And I know some of you may be joining us at our upcoming East Bay Innovation Awards event coming up on Thursday, March 26th. Ticket sales for that close next Friday, March 20th. So if you aren't already registered, please sign up so we can hope to see you there. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We look forward to catching you again very soon. Take care.